30,000 feet above ground, 200 passengers sat behind the cabin walls. The cockpit shook slightly, then a red warning light flashed on. The main pilot lost orientation as the system failed. The captain called for emergency backup, but no one was ready. In the economy section, a single dad sat quietly. He was a military veteran, his ticket upgraded at the last minute. A flight attendant ran down the aisle, voice trembling. The plane tilted gently, oxygen masks dropped. A calm voice spoke up. "I can help." People turned to look at him. Nobody believed. But when the cockpit door opened, 200 lives waited for his decision. Nathan Cole was 44 years old, a single father raising his 10-year-old son, Eli, in a quiet suburban neighborhood. He was a former military pilot who had flown transport missions in war zones, emergency evacuations under fire, and high-altitude operations that most civilian pilots would never attempt. Nathan had left the military 6 years ago when his wife died from a sudden illness. Eli had been 4 years old then, confused and heartbroken, needing his father more than the Air Force did. So Nathan resigned his commission, gave up his rank, and came home. Now he worked as a flight simulation instructor at a local training facility. It was steady work, predictable hours, and it allowed him to be there when Eli got home from school. He helped with homework, made dinner, attended parent-teacher conferences, coached Little League on weekends. Nathan had built a quiet life, one that revolved around his son. He didn't talk much about his military career. Most people in his neighborhood had no idea he'd once commanded crews in some of the most dangerous airspace in the world. This flight was the first trip of the year, taking Eli to visit his grandparents across the country. Nathan had booked economy seats, the cheapest option he could find. But at check-in, the gate agent had informed him there was a system error, and they'd been upgraded to business class at no charge. Nathan accepted without making a fuss. He and Eli boarded, found their seats, and settled in. Eli pressed his face against the window, watching the ground crew load baggage. Nathan closed his eyes, trying to rest before the long flight. What Nathan didn't know was that this wasn't a regular commercial flight. It was a charter jet, privately booked by a billionaire tech entrepreneur who was transporting his executive team and a group of investors to a high-stakes business summit. The billionaire had purchased nearly every seat on the plane, leaving only a handful for overflow passengers like Nathan and Eli. The crew had been under enormous pressure to stay on schedule. Delays were not acceptable. Profit margins were tight. Every minute counted. The captain was a skilled civilian pilot with thousands of flight hours, but most of his experience was in calm conditions, routine flights, predictable weather. He was good at what he did, but he'd never encountered a dual system failure at cruise altitude. When the warning lights started flashing 20 minutes into the flight, he froze for just a moment. That moment mattered. His co-pilot tried to troubleshoot, but the error codes weren't making sense. The systems were contradicting each other. One gauge said they were climbing, another said they were descending. The autopilot disengaged with a sharp alarm. In the cabin, passengers felt the plane shudder. A few gasps, nervous laughter, people gripping armrests. The flight attendants moved through the aisles with forced smiles, reassuring everyone that it was just turbulence. But Nathan could hear the strain in their voices. He opened his eyes, listened carefully. The engine pitch had changed. The vibration pattern was wrong. He recognized it immediately. He'd heard that exact sound before, during a training exercise in Colorado, when a dual hydraulic failure had nearly brought down his transport plane. He'd recovered that aircraft using manual override and sheer instinct. The whole crew had survived. Nathan glanced at Eli, who was still watching out the window, oblivious. He looked around the cabin. Business people on laptops, families with young children, an elderly couple holding hands. 200 lives, give or take. He did the math in his head. At this altitude with these symptoms, they had maybe 15 minutes before things got critical. Maybe less. The captain would be trying standard procedures, running through the checklist, hoping the problem resolved itself. But Nathan knew it wouldn't. This wasn't a simple fix. This required experience, muscle memory, and the kind of calm that only came from flying through actual danger. He unbuckled his seatbelt slowly, carefully, trying not to alarm Eli. His son looked up. "Dad, where are you going?" Nathan smiled, kept his voice steady. Just need to talk to the crew for a minute, buddy. Stay here, okay? Eli nodded, confused but trusting. Nathan stood, steadied himself against the slight rocking of the plane, and started walking toward the front of the cabin. A flight attendant intercepted him immediately. Sir, please return to your seat. We're experiencing some minor technical issues. Nathan looked her in the eye, kept his voice low and calm. I know, and I can help. She blinked, unsure. Sir, I don't understand. Nathan took a breath. I'm a pilot, military, not commercial. Not, but I've handled this exact failure before. Let me talk to your captain. The flight attendant hesitated, glancing toward the cockpit. The plane shuddered again, harder this time. She made a decision. Follow me. But before they could take 3 steps, a man in an expensive suit stood up from first class. He was tall, mid-50s, with the kind of confidence that came from never being told no. Excuse me, he said loudly, addressing the flight attendant. What's going on here? Why is this passenger out of his seat? The flight attendant turned, flustered. Sir, please sit down. We're handling the situation. The man in the suit ignored her, looking directly at Nathan. You think you're a pilot? There was mockery in his voice, barely concealed. Let me guess. You fly crop dusters on weekends? Nathan didn't respond. He just stood there, calm, waiting. But the man wasn't finished. Lady, this is a charter flight. We paid a lot of money for safety and professionalism. We don't need some random passenger playing hero. A few other passengers murmured agreement. One woman clutched her purse tighter, as if Nathan was a threat. The flight attendant looked torn, glancing between Nathan and the man in the suit. Sir, he says he has pilot experience. The man laughed, sharp and dismissive. Everyone says they have experience. Sit down before you make things worse. The plane tilted slightly, a sudden drop that made stomachs lurch. Overhead compartments rattled. Someone screamed. The oxygen mask dropped with a loud hiss, yellow cups dangling in front of every seat. Panic rippled through the cabin instantly. Parents grabbed their children. People fumbled with the masks, trying to remember the safety instructions. The flight attendant's face went pale. She pressed the call button, speaking urgently into her headset. Captain, we have a situation. Masks deployed. Requesting immediate update. Nathan stayed standing, his hand gripping the seat back for balance. He didn't put on a mask. He was watching, listening, calculating. The engine sound was wrong. The descent rate was too fast. They were losing altitude not rapidly, but steadily. The captain was probably trying to level off, but without full hydraulic control, the plane was sluggish, unresponsive. Nathan had maybe 10 minutes now, maybe less. He turned back to the flight attendant. I need to get to the cockpit, now. She nodded, but the man in the suit stepped into the aisle, blocking the way. No, absolutely not. You're not going anywhere near that cockpit. For all we know, you're trying to hijack the plane. Nathan's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed level. I'm trying to save it. Get out of my way. The man didn't move. Show me credentials. Prove you're a pilot. Nathan didn't carry his military ID anymore. He turned it in when he resigned. He had a driver's license, a library card, a photo of Eli in his wallet. Nothing that would convince this man. I don't have credentials with me, Nathan said quietly, but I know what's happening to this plane, and I know how to fix it. Every second we waste, people die, including you. The man hesitated just for a moment, but it was enough. Another flight attendant, older, more experienced, pushed through from the back of the cabin. She'd been listening to the cockpit feed through her headset. Let him through, she said firmly. Captain says the systems are failing. We need all the help we can get. The man in the suit opened his mouth to argue, but she cut him off. Sir, sit down and put your mask on. That's an order. He stared at her, then at Nathan, then slowly backed into his seat, muttering curses under his breath. Nathan moved forward quickly, following the senior flight attendant. She unlocked the cockpit door, knocked twice, and pushed it open. Inside, the scene was tense. The captain was gripping the yoke with both hands, sweat beading on his forehead. The co-pilot was frantically scanning readouts, flipping switches, trying to isolate the problem. Alarms were blaring, lights flashing red and amber across the instrument panel. The captain glanced back as Nathan entered. "Who are you?" His voice was strained, barely holding it together. Nathan stepped closer, not touching anything, just observing. "Nathan Cole, former military pilot. I've seen this failure before. Dual hydraulic loss, correct?" The captain stared at him, surprise cutting through the panic. "How did you know?" Nathan pointed to a specific gauge. "That reading there, and the way the plane's yawing left. You're compensating manually, but it's not responding the way it should. You're fighting it." The co-pilot turned. "We've tried everything. The backup system isn't engaging. We're losing altitude at 200 feet per minute. At this rate, we'll be below safe cruising altitude in 6 minutes." Nathan nodded, his mind already running through the solution. "You need to shut down the primary hydraulic system completely. Force a full reset. It's counterintuitive, but it's the only way to get the backup to kick in." The captain shook his head. "That's insane. If the backup doesn't engage, we lose all control." Nathan met his eyes, steady and calm. "If you don't do it, you lose control anyway, just slower. I've done this before, trust me." The co-pilot looked at the captain. "Sir, we're out of options." The captain's hands were shaking on the yoke. He was a good pilot, but he'd never trained for this. He'd never had to make a call like this with 200 lives on the line. He looked at Nathan, really looked at him, searching for certainty, for confidence, for anything that said this man knew what he was doing. And Nathan just stood there, calm as stone, waiting. "All right," the captain said finally. "Tell me what to do." Nathan moved to the co-pilot's station, hands hovering over controls. "First, reduce throttle on both engines to 60%. We need to reduce stress on the hydraulic system before we reset it." The captain glanced at the altimeter. "We're already at 28,000 feet. If we drop lower, we'll be in commercial traffic lanes." Nathan nodded. "Contact air traffic control, declare an emergency, request clearance for descent, and direct vector to nearest suitable airport." The co-pilot grabbed the radio. "Mayday, mayday, mayday. This is Charter Flight 749er. Dual hydraulic failure, declaring emergency, requesting immediate descent clearance and vectors to nearest airport." The radio crackled back. "Charter 749er, message received. Cleared to descend at pilot's discretion. Nearest suitable airport is Peterson Regional, bearing 270, 60 miles. Emergency services notified. Say souls on board." The co-pilot's voice wavered. 207 souls on board. Nathan felt the weight of those words. 207 people. He thought of Eli, sitting in seat 18C, probably scared, wondering where his dad was. Nathan pushed the thought away. Only focus mattered now. "On my mark, flip the hydraulic master cutoff switch. Red guarded switch on the overhead panel." The captain looked up, found it. "Got it." Nathan watched the gauges. "When I say now, flip it. Count to 5. Flip it back on. Backup system should engage within 3 seconds. If not, we go to manual control and I talk you through emergency landing." The co-pilot stared at him. "Where did you learn this?" Nathan kept his eyes on instruments. "Afghanistan. Lost hydraulics on a transport during evacuation. 200 civilians on board. Had to force a reset mid-flight and land on a bombed-out runway with half the control surfaces gone." The cockpit went silent, except for alarms. "Did everyone make it?" Nathan's jaw tightened. "Everyone made it." The captain took a breath. "Why did you leave the military?" Nathan glanced at him. "My wife died. My son needed me." The captain nodded slowly. "So you gave up flying?" Nathan shook his head. "I gave up flying for a living. Not being a father." The captain looked at him, respect shifting in his expression. "What's your son's name?" Nathan felt tightness in his chest. "Eli. 10 years old, sitting in 18C." The captain's grip on the yoke steadied. "Then let's get him home." Nathan turned back to instruments. The altimeter was dropping. 27,000. 26. "We're doing this now. Captain, on my mark. 3, 2, 1, now." The captain flipped the switch. The entire panel went dark. The plane shuddered violently. Nathan counted. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now flip it back. The captain slammed the switch up. For 3 agonizing seconds, nothing. The plane yawed left, nose dipping. Then a mechanical whir. The backup hydraulic system engaged with a solid thunk. Gauges flickered, lit up green. The yoke responded. The captain pulled back, leveling the plane. It's working? His voice filled with disbelief. Nathan let out a held breath. Good. Maintain altitude. We're still going to that regional airport. Get on the ground soon as possible. This backup is holding, but I don't trust it for long flight. The captain nodded, adjusting course. The co-pilot updated air traffic control. Nathan stepped back, legs suddenly weak, adrenaline fading, exhaustion replacing it. The captain glanced at him. You just saved 200 lives. Nathan shook his head. We're not down yet. Then another alarm. Different one. Nathan's eyes snapped to new warning light. Engine fire, left side. His heart sank. The captain saw it. No, not now. We just fixed hydraulics. Nathan moved quickly, checking engine temperature. Climbing fast. Too fast. Fuel leak feeding the fire. Happened during hydraulic failure. Weakened a seal or cracked a line. Shut down that engine immediately. Deploy fire suppression. The co-pilot was already reaching. Shutting down engine 1. Fire suppression activated. The plane lurched as left engine went silent. Flying on one engine now, over mountains, 60 miles from nearest runway. Nathan calculated. Single engine, reduced power, increased drag. We're not making Peterson Regional. The captain stared. What? Nathan pointed at fuel gauge. Burning fuel too fast, compensating for dead engine. Maybe 20 minutes flight time left. Peterson is 40 minutes away at this speed. The co-pilot's voice cracked. Then what do we do? Nathan scanned navigation display for options. There, 15 miles northwest, small airstrip, barely more than landing strip for crop dusters. Runway short, maybe 4,000 feet. This plane needed 6,000 minimum, but normal wasn't an option. There, Meadowbrook Field, small regional strip. Runway's too short for this plane, but it's paved and close. The captain shook his head. We'll overshoot. We'll crash. Nathan met his eyes. Not if I'm flying. The captain stared. What? Nathan's voice was calm, final. Let me take controls. I've landed heavier planes on shorter runways in worse conditions. You're good, but you've never done this. I have. Let me bring us in. The captain looked at co-pilot, then back at Nathan. 207 lives. His career. His pride. All weighed against certainty in Nathan's eyes. He unbuckled. She's yours. Nathan slid into captain's seat, hands finding yoke, feet on rudder pedals. Familiar, like coming home. The plane responded to his touch. For the first time since this started, Nathan believed they might actually make it. Nathan lined up the approach to Meadowbrook Field, eyes scanning for the runway. It appeared below, a narrow strip of asphalt cutting through farmland, impossibly short. The co-pilot called out altitude and speed. 3,000 feet, 200 knots, coming in hot. Nathan's voice was steady. I know. We need the speed. I'll bleed it off at the last second with full flaps and reverse thrust. It's going to be rough, but we'll stop. The captain, standing behind Nathan, gripped the seat. Are you sure? Nathan didn't hesitate. No, but it's the only option we have. In the cabin, passengers felt the steep descent. The flight attendants had prepared everyone for emergency landing. Oxygen masks still hanging. People gripping armrests, some praying, some crying. Eli sat in 18C, small hands pressed against the window, watching the ground rise. He didn't fully understand, but he knew his dad was up front, and that meant they'd be okay. That's what dads did. They fixed things. Nathan lowered the landing gear manually. The hydraulic backup was holding, barely. He could feel sluggishness in controls, delay between input and response. One engine roaring, the other silent. The plane wanted to yaw right. Nathan fought it constantly. Flaps to 30. The co-pilot complied. The plane shuddered as drag increased. Speed dropped. 1,000 feet. 800. The runway raced toward them. Nathan's hands were steady, breathing calm. This was muscle memory. 500 feet, 150 knots. The co-pilot's voice tight with fear. Nathan pulled back slightly, adjusting glide slope. Too steep, they'd slam. Too shallow, they'd overshoot into trees. 200 feet. Ground rushed up. Nathan could see individual blades of grass, fence posts, a tractor. 100 feet. Brace for impact. Nathan flared the nose up, bleeding speed. Rear wheels kissed runway with a screech. He slammed remaining engine into reverse thrust, deployed spoilers, stood on brakes. The plane decelerated violently. Passengers lurched forward. Overhead bins popped. Bags tumbled. The runway end approached fast. Too fast. Nathan could see grass beyond. Drainage ditch, chain link fence. They weren't stopping in time. He cut the nose wheel hard left, letting the plane spin slightly to scrub speed. Fuselage groaned. Right wing dipped. For a moment, it felt like they might flip. Then the plane straightened, momentum dying. They rolled to a stop 50 feet from runway end, nose pointing toward grass, still on pavement. Silence. Then cockpit erupted. Co-pilot let out shaky laugh. Captain exhaled, held breath. Nathan's hands still on yoke, knuckles white. He forced himself to let go. Shut down remaining engine. Get everyone off. Now. The captain nodded, moving. He opened cockpit door, called to flight attendants. Emergency evacuation. All slides. Move quickly. Stay calm. Slides deployed with loud pops. Passengers began filing out, some stumbling, some helping others. Parents carried children. Emergency vehicles approached, sirens wailing. Nathan unbuckled, stood, legs shaky. He walked back into cabin. Eli was still in his seat, eyes wide. Dad? Nathan knelt, pulling his son into tight hug. Hey, buddy, we're okay. We're on the ground. You did great. Eli's voice was small. I was scared. Nathan nodded. Me too, but we're safe now. He helped Eli to his feet, guided him toward exit. As they reached the slide, a man stepped forward. The billionaire who'd chartered the flight. Disheveled, tie loosened, face pale. He looked at Nathan. You're the pilot, the one who took controls. Nathan nodded. Yes, sir. The billionaire extended his hand. You saved my life. You saved all of us. Nathan shook briefly. Just did what needed to be done. But the billionaire didn't let go. No, you did more than that. You made a choice. You put lives over profit, over ego, over everything. I pushed this crew to stay on schedule. I pressured them to cut corners. It almost killed everyone. His voice cracked. I'm sorry. He turned to the captain and co-pilot. I'm sorry for putting you in that position. The captain nodded, exhausted. We'll talk later. Right now, get everyone safe. Nathan guided Eli down the slide. They landed on grass, sun warm on faces. Emergency responders swarmed the plane. Nathan stood holding Eli's hand, watching. The billionaire approached again. I want to offer you a position. Chief Safety Officer for my aviation division. Name your salary. You can write policies, build training programs, whatever you think is right. Nathan was quiet, then shook his head. I appreciate the offer, but I'm not interested in a job. I'm interested in change, real change. The billionaire frowned. What do you mean? Nathan looked down at Eli, then back. Fund a safety training program, not for your company, for everyone. Free courses for pilots who want advanced emergency training. Scholarships for people who can't afford flight school. Build simulators that replicate real failures, not just manual ones. And do it without putting your name on it. Just do it because it's right. The billionaire stared, then slowly nodded. Okay, I'll do it. You have my word. Nathan held his gaze. Then that's all I need. He turned and walked away, Eli's hand in his, leaving the billionaire standing on grass, watching them go. 6 months later, Nathan was back in his simulation training facility, guiding a young pilot through an emergency scenario. The student's hands were shaking on the controls, sweat beading on his forehead. I can't do this, the student said. It's too much. Nathan's voice was calm, steady. You can. Take a breath. Focus on one thing at a time. You don't have to fix everything at once. Just the next thing, then the next. The student took a breath, adjusted his approach, and brought the simulated plane down safely. He sat back exhaling. I did it, Nathan nodded. You did. Now do it again. That evening, Nathan picked up Eli from baseball practice. His son climbed into the car, covered in dirt, grinning. Dad, I hit a double today. Nathan smiled. That's great, buddy. Tell me about it. As they drove home, Eli asked the question he'd been holding on to for months. Dad, were you scared on the plane? Nathan thought about it. Yes, I was very scared. Eli looked at him, surprised. But you didn't act scared. Nathan pulled into their driveway, turned off the engine. Being scared and staying calm aren't opposites. Sometimes you're most calm when you're most scared because you know people are counting on you. Eli thought about that. Is that why you left the Air Force? Because I was counting on you? Nathan felt a tightness in his chest. Yeah, that's exactly why. Eli unbuckled his seatbelt, leaned over, and hugged his dad. Thanks for coming home. Nathan held him tight. Always, buddy. Always. The safety training program the billionaire had funded was announced quietly. No press conference, no branding. Just a simple website offering free advanced emergency training for pilots, scholarships for aspiring aviators from low-income backgrounds, and state-of-the-art simulators that replicated the kinds of failures most training programs ignored. Within a year, over 300 pilots had completed the program. 2 of them had used the training to save planes in real emergencies. The program didn't carry Nathan's name. Most people who went through it never knew who'd inspired it, and that was exactly how Nathan wanted it. He continued teaching at the simulation facility. He never went back to flying professionally. He didn't need to. The sky was still there, still part of him, but his place was on the ground, with Eli, building a life one day at a time. Sometimes, late at night, he'd think about that flight, the warning lights, the engine fire, the impossibly short runway. He'd think about the 207 people who walked away, who went home to their families, who got a second chance. And he'd think about the choice he'd made, not just in the cockpit, but years before when he chose Eli over his career. People asked him sometimes if he regretted leaving the military, if he missed the thrill of flying. He always gave the same answer. I didn't leave the sky. I just changed what I was flying toward. He was flying toward Little League games and homework help and bedtime stories, toward a life where being present mattered more than being impressive, toward a son who knew his father would always show up, always stay calm, always choose him. That was the control Nathan kept, not over planes or emergencies or crises, but over what mattered most. And that was enough, more than enough. If this story moved you, follow Daddy Healing Stories for more powerful tales about fathers who show up when it matters most, who stay calm under pressure, and who never stop choosing their families. Hit subscribe and join a community that celebrates the quiet heroism of everyday dads, because the greatest flights aren't always in the sky. See you in the next story.